Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining our School on Wheels workshop today, Mentoring Teens. My name is Amanda Carr, and I'm the Engagement Specialist at School on Wheels. Before I introduce our workshop presenters, a few notes. For the purposes of sound quality, all participants are currently muted. You have the ability to ask a question at any time using the question pane, so simply type in the question and press send. We'll choose the order of questions and read them out loud. You may also wish to use headphones for better sound. So tonight I'm joined by 3 experienced School on Wheels tutors. Alana Johnston comes from a family of educators and knows the importance of learning both inside and outside of school. She has been tutoring the same student for over 3 years and has developed a great working and personal relationship with her. Jake Troxell believes that compassion is the most important quality for anyone mentoring a student. He has volunteered at School on Wheels for 1 year. We are also joined by Chris Van Nest, who has been tutoring with School on Wheels for a year at a group home. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight and sharing some of your ideas for mentoring. I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you. Appreciate that. I'll start. My name's Jake. Just got mentioned there. Kind of something really dear and close to my heart is this mentoring teens. So I'm really looking forward to what we're going to talk about here in a second. Do you guys want to introduce yourselves, or you just want to go jump in with this?
Sure. Well, now you put us on the spot. Like you said, I'm Chris Van Nest. I moved to LA about 2 years ago. I was broke, I was unemployed, and I was realizing that I was spending my entire life just cooped up inside, job hunting, and there was like a whole city out here. So I got involved with School on Wheels just for the sake of being able to get out of the house and being able to do something with a purpose. You know, job hunting, it's fun and all, but it's not, and it's not rewarding. But this was, and I'm glad that I got involved, and I've been with it ever since. And although I am now gainfully employed and I could quit this at any moment, I mean, I won't, because I love my students and I love the organization and I love the 2 people I'm here with today.
Oh, thank you, Chris. Alana Johnston here. I moved to LA 4 years ago from Canada, and as Amanda had mentioned, I do come from a family of educators, so I know how important school is, but I also know how much I struggled because we all have different ways of learning, and that was why I wanted to be a tutor, because I'm someone who's very outgoing and enthusiastic, and I like to use those personal tools in my life to be able to professionally help a student in school and in life. So I think my forte is dealing with students that are a little more introverted and helping them kind of come out of their shell, which helped improve her grades and stuff like that. So I feel very fortunate. I've been with the same student the whole time. She's so chill. You guys will love her.
And I mean, look at that power pose.
I know.
What? Okay.
It's the only one I had. So, okay.
All right. Moving on.
All right, yes, to the next one. So these are the 5 key points we're going to touch on. Intention, the connection that we're going to have with the actual students, because that's incredibly important. Listening to them, also to carry that over into our lives. Everyone we talk to, the importance of that, not just with the School on Wheels, but pretty much everywhere. The importance also of questioning, how incredibly important that is, and getting to know others through questioning and getting to see the way they see the world, and then also sharing our perspective and allowing them to share their perspective, so we can see through their eyes and they can see through ours. So those are going to be the 5 main points we talk about. And then this was a quote by Mr. Roosevelt that I quite enjoyed, so you guys can check that out if you want to. So the first one is intention. And these are kind of the points to break it down. The approach, mindset, authenticity, confidence, inquisitive, and then understanding. So with this, it's challenging to connect with a student that we're going to talk about later. But the approach, if our mindset is in the right place of wanting to help a student, it's going to work. I can guarantee that it's going to work. If you care about the kid you're helping, you're going to do all that you can do to make that kid's experience awesome and to make learning fun and interesting and something they want to come do. So the approach is kind of where it starts. And I think having the mindset, which follows that, about caring about them as a person is so vital to everything.
Yeah, I think kids, teens, whatever age, they're very aware when someone doesn't want to be somewhere because they do the same things themselves and they pick up on those cues. So in terms of approach, you have to approach with the mindset of I want to be here, and that is how you will be authentic. So it's like you have to, and they can see that in your enthusiasm and in the eye contact you make with them, the energy that you bring, and the general interest that you show in them. Because if you don't want to be there, they don't want to be there. It's so hard to be struggling in school and then to sit with someone who doesn't want to help you while you're struggling in school. That's going to make them feel really bad about themselves. And keep in mind, we volunteer to do this. So we want to be here. We have to make sure that they know that.
Also keeping in mind, too, that these are teenagers, you know. They're not stupid, and they can read right through the BS. Like I'm sure you guys can relate to. We've all BS at some point in our lives. And it's exactly like she said. If you don't want to be there, they're going to easily pick up on it. And remember, too, especially during the first couple of meetings, you're still a stranger to these people. So it's not going to be as comfortable for them to just completely open up to you and be your buddy. So by following these 6 points and, you know, especially going off like authenticity, approach, how you're phrasing your questions and just overall statements to them, they're going to pick up on it. So it's important to follow those 6 steps. To recovery.
You left off on authenticity, and I think when you're authentic and who you are, that breeds confidence. You just become who you are, and you're going to step into that situation and just say, this is who I am, and it allows your student to be who they are. And it's kids just need confidence. They're at that place in school where they get judged all day. They just need to be reminded that they're important and cared about, and they have a brain that can actually do everything they're being asked of. So the authenticity is so important to lead into that confidence. And then I think the confidence, when you understand who you are and you know what you're there for, it allows you to step into each conversation wanting to learn about them and not needing to share who you are with them, but just coming to a place in which you want to find out about their life. And they don't have, a lot of these kids don't have that. They don't have people in their lives. They might not have parents who ask them how their day's doing. And when you come in and you're inquisitive, they respond to that and they open up. That opening up that you mentioned doesn't happen at first, but whenever you come in authentically and confidently caring about them, they see that. They pick up on that. And you being present and wanting to be there, and they pick up on that. And then that leads to the understanding of what this kid is like and what they're going through. And it's difficult in this city. It's not easy, and especially the situations that they're in. So these are all set up.
I'll say this for the intention for these 6 that we just reviewed. This is definitely the jumping off point. It's like these are the things to consider when you're about to start or you're in those first couple sessions, as Chris had mentioned. These are the things to keep in mind, because if you start off on the right note and you cover these things, we don't have to think of them again. Now we're in the rhythm and in the motion, but those first couple sessions, it's like first impressions do matter, and it'll be first impressions for the first few times you meet. So I think if you really focus on these, it's something you don't have to think about again, and it makes it all easier if we nail it right from the jump.
True. I love that.
Great.
So well done. Well done. All right. So that's the intention and everything we went through. I guess we're going to go to the next slide, which is the connection. That all of these main points are going to be so important. But this one is kind of the establishment of your relationship. And as in any relationship, it's so important to bring who you are. Again, that authenticity, probably going to bring that up quite a bit tonight. And the first one here, the care, the authenticity to actually care. and not just be there for the sake of, let me put this on my resume, look at me volunteering, but actually caring about that kid's life. I'm going to sound like a broken record, but going into it and showing a kid their importance is so, so vital to a connection being established. Like, I don't know for perfectly everyone's situation, but I know at home these kids don't always have parents who care, like, intimately and deeply about them. And so bringing that to every conversation that you have with them is just so important. So connection, first one is just caring about them and just stepping in with that. The next one is comforting, which kind of goes in with the caring in a way that they need somebody to just feel what they're feeling, to say it's okay what you're going through. And that you understand, and that's why it's important to be inquisitive, so that you actually know what they're going through, and not just, I get you, but asking them questions of what they're going through and how they're feeling, to have them step into a place of comfort, which will establish that connection.
Okay, so if I could just jump in.
Yeah, of course.
So there's kind of two sides to that. There is, like, I know that there's hard times that these students can be having, of course. But on the flip side of it, to give real working examples, one of the ways that I showed my student that I cared was I just asked her questions about what she likes, which at the beginning when you start, you kind of have that like questionnaire to find out what kind of music they like and stuff like that as a jumping off point to be able to connect with them. But for her, it was very comforting. So care and comforting. It was comforting to know that somebody was going to listen to anything, just anything. Yep. So it's like, I was telling Jake and Chris earlier, my students really into these like dragon books. So one of the things is like, I will ask her, oh, what ended up happening with those two dragons? Did they get along in the end? And again, there's 10 of these, 15 of these books, guys. So if your student likes them, I don't know, maybe think twice, but there's a lot of books. But she takes comfort in knowing that I'm not going to judge her and that I am genuinely interested. And it comes, I mean, down here when we say inclusion and encouraging next two that are coming up, sometimes just even rather than addressing the things in their life that are kind of a struggle, just talking about anything in general shows them that I care about them, and that will get them to talk more, because if they know I care and that I'm there for them and I'm not judging them, they're a lot more likely to listen. When you do give that school instruction, when you do make a suggestion for their homework or presentation. So I found like getting on the same page about just one thing, we take a few minutes. If she, in the beginning of the session, I do a quick follow-up. What ended up happening, I time it. It's maybe like 3 minutes for her to talk about this book. But I'll say this, the next week, she's usually finished the book and is telling me about another one because she's so excited to tell me about these dragons. But that's a way to show that you're caring in a positive way, to just ask anything, but it's still school related because it is reading. So I found a way to kind of connect the two. So it is kind of educational, but for her, it's so much fun. And she loves it. But that's like a specific example for my student.
And just to piggyback off of that real quick, it's obviously what you said is 100% completely true, but it's also in the little things too, like show up on time. You know, if you're constantly late, then to that student, it makes it look like you're not a priority. And, you know, it's kind of like, to repeat what you said, it's like, these students may not have always been people's priority. When I first started, my tutoring time was causing me to always be late because I would have to rush from work and get there, and I was just always late. And so finally I was just like, look, kid, this is the time we're now going to meet. Does that work for you? He was like, perfect. It gives me extra time, too, after school to finish up what I have to do and come home and prepare for you to come. And so instead of them, you know, both of us being rushed, it was like, you know, we both had like an hour or so after we were done with school and work, and then we could all meet up and, you know, we were ready to take on the time versus rushing there, struggling, and we're both like sweating bullets, panting, trying to just get through the work and be done.
I think that's great.
I was going to say, I love that you were willing to reschedule things to make that hour work or however long you had,
Mhm.
because it's so important. Like seeing that they're willing to, their tutors willing to adjust their schedule is so important. To change what they're doing in a day to cater to them, to show that care is out of this world to them. And that's so wonderful. And thank you for doing that. It's wonderful. I love it.
My
I love
pleasure.
it. Also, I am going over this, and I'm not a big examples guy. These two obviously are. So thank you for helping out with that.
I got dragon stories
I
all
know.
day.
Yeah. So I'm just going to touch on these,
Yeah.
and then they're going to probably follow up with some examples. Hopefully some come to mind when I'm explaining this. But if they don't, I know you two got my back. It's nice little trio here. Anyways, on to the next little bullet point. The inclusive part here is kind of, as it was mentioned earlier, to know that they're not going through this alone. It is so important that there's somebody walking along with them on this journey. And they're not, and us understanding where they're coming from. It's not like we're dragging them along with us. We're walking step by step. And if they fall, we're there to fall with them and then to pick them up and to be their crutch. And so being inclusive is so important, to have them see that we are that to them, and how important, and then also the encouragement, because if you, let's say they're not getting a good grade in class, like 6 out of 10, which is failing, they're not going to feel very encouraged. They need to have somebody who comes alongside them and just like, it's okay. It's like life is more than this 6 out of 10 on a homework exam or whatever it may be. And just be somebody who says, all right, the next one, we're going to study a little bit harder. We're going to put more time into this. We're going to see what you didn't understand here. Try and work towards that, and just encourage them that it's okay. Next time, we're going to do better. And that's what life is about, just learning and growing through those situations where we miss 4 out of 10 questions and not getting down about it. And that might happen a lot in their lives, where they make a mistake and everyone's like, oh, why did you do that? And so encouraging them through that, and just helping them along that is really important. So the last two here, hopes and interests. I put hopes first because I think knowing where somebody wants to go and planting a seed that the future is better and brighter in front of them is more important than finding something right now that they're interested in, but then in 2 weeks they might not be, like a crush. Like, oh, I might be into this guy, like right now, or into this girl right now, but in 2 weeks it's not going to be there. So I put hopes here so that there's something for them to look forward to in their life coming, that is going to get better, and hopefully bring what's coming into the present. And then interests, that's again where connections are made.
So if I can jump in, hopes and interests, I really like these two because, so an example of how I use both of these to make a connection with my student and to get her more on board with her schoolwork was, I know she's interested in animals. So I had asked her, do you think that's something you would want to work with later on in life? And she was like, well, yeah, I guess so. And I was like, okay, well, what kind of jobs could you have where you got to be with animals? We went through a few, and then she had said veterinarian, and that was like something she would hope to do later in life. So it was kind of great because then when the homework did come, it was more encouragement for her to do her science, because I was like, well, we can't be a vet unless we have this science, and so on and so forth. So it was kind of great, and it's not going to be the same for everybody. Some of them are going to say Drake. I don't know. So, but sometimes, like if you at least, if you look at the theme, so maybe if they say Drake, okay, well, what's that theme?
Yes.
Well, maybe it's music. Okay, well, music production. Well, what does that require? So, you know, she just said she likes animals. It started with her talking about her cat, and then we were able to make it something bigger, which made it easier for me to get to know her and to put it right back into that schoolwork, because now we know if she wants to do this, well, this is what we have to do to get there. So this, no matter what they say, you can always kind of pan back and find what the greater meaning of that is, and a way that it can be used to influence what they're doing now to get to where they want to be, whether it's a job or meeting someone or a passion, anything, we can find a way to always tie back in education.
That was the perfect example for what I'm about to segue into, especially about she wanted to be a vet, so you're like, okay, we need to focus on science.
Mm-hmm.
I had a student, he was my second student that I was tutoring, and he told me that he just wanted to grow up and be an auto mechanic. So like, okay, but he still wanted to go to Arizona State. Why? I don't know. Let's go Michigan State. But he wanted to go there. So it was like, okay, so if you want to, get into auto mechanic, you need to know science, you need to know math, especially if you're going to go to a major university like that too. So let's focus on that. Then I took him out to my car, which needed spark plugs at the time, opened my hood and was like, I need spark plugs, tell me how I'd fix the problem. And he did. And it was like, cool, it's like a little hands-on experience that, you could kind of just get involved with your students like that and, hone in on their specific interests and then start focusing on that.
Oh, that's amazing. Wow, that's such a good example.
I know. Yes.
Awesome.
I love it.
So I have a question from a listener who is asking about saying that I get nervous working with teens. I think that they notice insecurity. Any suggestions? So that's, in establishing a connection if you are not completely comfortable, or, you might be working with teens for the first time and, or be intimidated.
Mm-hmm.
How would you deal with that situation?
Good question, because working with teens can be tough. I mean, we've all been there. And yes, they can smell weakness, but for lack of a better term, but just like these kids are going to be nervous around you, it's only natural that you're nervous around them. So maybe let them start asking you some questions, like let them get to know you versus vice versa. Make them feel like they're kind of leading the session versus you coming in and trying to lead it.
Yeah, I'll say this. I understand being intimidated by teens because you really don't know what they're going to do. But the thing to remember, and this might be a weird way of thinking, at least for me, high school is like the worst time ever, where everyone is so insecure and everything matters and is the world. So I think if you just take a moment to, and kind of like what Chris is saying, if you take a moment to think like, this person's the one who is going through a lot and is insecure and they're trying to be cool or whatever word you want to use, and that's not your job. Your job is to just sit there and make a connection with them, ask them questions, answer their questions. But our job's like not to be cool. Our job is to just be there and answer questions and talk to them about what they need to talk about. So I personally like to come clean about things. So I know with my student, I said, I was like, like she said that she was shy, and then I was like, yeah, when I get nervous, I talk too much, so I'll probably talk this entire time, and like kind of made a bit of a joke. Or you can say to them like, oh, this is kind of weird. I don't really know where to start, so why don't we just ask each other some questions, something like that. I think, but you can, you're a human being too, so we're not teachers. We don't need necessarily authority. We just need to be a person to them, and they're probably as scared as you are. Like, no, they for sure are. They're for sure as scared as you are. Of course they are. They're teenagers. Jake, I don't know, because you work with teens as well, right?
Yeah. No, both of your answers are spot on. Mine, just kind of like Alana's, is just say to them, you don't know everything.
Mm-hmm.
Just come straight out. Then you take that pressure of being a person of authority in their life and needing to have all the answers. You kind of just say, all right, I don't know this, and be comfortable in the unknown. I know that's really difficult for us because we want to live in a world where we know everything, but it's not always the case. So that is a wonderful question.
Yeah.
Best way to do that, just get to know yourself, and then through that confidence will arise, the authenticity, and everything on the first slide will come into play. Then you can work on the connections. So that's my answer to that one.
Shall we?
We shall.
All right.
All right.
Let's take it to the next slide.
Next one. Listening.
This one. Yeah.
I love listening. Yeah, so listening, probably the most underrated skill to exist in the world today. Listening, man, where to even begin? Not on this page, but examples of listening. When we don't do it, even when we do listen, I find that there is times when we listen for a reason to benefit ourselves. In this circumstance in which we're going to help other kids, we're there to listen to them, not to share so much of everything that we know, but to be a soundboard for them so that they know that they're cared about. And so listening is just so incredibly vital. I don't know, I'm sure you can go look at books to teach you how to listen and find all of the tools you need online, but listening is just so important, not just with this, but in everything. So with that being said, I want to kind of touch on the first one, which is being present. Not being concerned about having that right. Kid asks a question, and you are, as they're asking the question, trying to come up with an answer in your mind. As odd as that is, we're not fully present in that situation because our mind is jumping to what we're going to be saying in the future. And so with listening, to stay present through that whole time that they're speaking is so incredibly important. And then not having to feel like you have to have that right word to say. To go back to ask that question is being comfortable in the not knowing and being someone who's just confident in who you are to say enough that you don't know. So being present, I think, is kind of the first step in being able to listen attentively. And then after that is just the focus on the person speaking. And it goes both ways. If we show a student that we're really attentive and they feel what it's like for someone to pay attention to them, they're going to want to do it back to you. It's one of those... we love to give what we've been given. And so if we're shown focus to them, then they're going to want to give it back. Because that's how we kind of grow up. When we're taught the correct rules of just communicating and interacting with other people. So the second point here, just to be focused. And then the control, this one might be a little odd to throw in here. And the control I'm speaking of is the mind when it wants to go look around the room and look at all the people on the wall and what Thursday, Friday have in store, who else is in the room, what they're doing. It's controlling the mind to make sure that we are, back to the first point, present, and we can focus on what the student's saying, so we can listen, and just keeping in control and not letting our mind wander, which is sometimes a challenge. Because we live in a world where we go from second to second to second, changing our focus. So it can be kind of hard to do those first three. So adaptive would be the next one, and that is to go along with whatever is happening, whatever the student wants to talk about. If they want to talk about dragons, allow them to talk about dragons. And control not only works for your mind, but also in the situation of, in this particular instance, how much time to spend on the student talking about the dragons. Mm-hmm. So just being adaptive to whatever they need in that moment, that's a way to kind of begin to listen. And get to this point in which others will feel that they have your full attention. So that's number 4. Number 5, the last point of listening is don't go in with an agenda. Don't go in as the authority, as a teacher, to say, I know everything, listen to all that I'm going to say. Just go in there with the intent to help them. Mm-hmm. And just see where that takes you. If you get talking to them I'm gonna use dragons all night tonight. I guess that's what I'm
Hey man,
using.
she does it
I
every
know.
week.
If she wants to talk, at the end she wants to talk about dragons for 15 minutes after everything's done, then by all means, let the dragons fly. And so just, I think agenda, and this is not just applicable to tutoring, this is applicable to every day, in every situation, every friendship.
I think you did a great job with this slide and of explaining it. And if I were to condense it, I would say there's 2 keys to listening: repetition and follow-up. So one of the best ways to listen so you can retain the information to show someone you're listening is to repeat them. So, for example, when you said control, when you were explaining that to me, I would say right back to you like, oh, okay, so I control my mind from wandering so that I'm able to listen better. And you'd be like, yes, exactly. Great. And then follow-up would be the next week when we come back. I'd be like, oh, so how did your conversations go this week? Were you able to control your mind and not wander as much? And I find to apply that to the actual tutoring and the homework, I follow up on every single test, on every single homework assignment, and on her books or on a presentation she had, or even if it was like something with her friend. Like one time my student, her and her friend were supposed to do the project, and then they kind of got in this fight, and then that was the last I heard of it. So the next week I was like, were you and your friend able to work out the project together? And then she was like, yeah, we made out and we got it done. I was like, great. So it was like, great. She got to tell me about her friend for a second, but she got the project done, and that was all I wanted to know. So that's it. I would say repetition and follow-up. And it really means a lot to the kids when you remember they had an assignment or a presentation or something. It means so much to them when you ask next week, how did it go?
And you might find a common interest somewhere in there from listening, something that, you guys can just click and connect on and then keep a conversation going from that.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
I love it.
Definitely.
Cool.
So,
shall we?
That was listening. Are there any questions that pertain to that, or shall we?
I think you can go on.
Great.
All right. So the next.
Are they typing hurry up?
Yeah. So the next one is questioning, and this is to follow the listening. I've seen that a lot of the times what happens is after listening, your mind gets triggered to something. You get inquisitive and wondering, curious about what's going on in someone else's life. And so I followed listening up with questions because I only believe it to be natural in a conversation that once you hear an interest that you both have, to question how we got there, why we both like that common interest. So hence this one.
I do actually. I have a question that came in about listening from a tutor, and she says, and she's kind of maybe disagreeing a little bit with you, saying, isn't repetition and following up on things having an agenda? I think it's okay to have some agenda and guidelines in tutoring.
Well, to me, that comes after you've already heard them out, which is why I wouldn't consider it having an agenda, because you did listen to them, and to repeat something back is just for you to retain information. So I guess it's your own personal agenda to listen, I guess is how I would describe it. But I can understand the confusion in that. For me, it's more something that I process on my end to be able to come back the next week to A, show that I listen, and B, to find out how they did on whatever project, because they do like talking about it. So I guess that is kind of an agenda, but the agenda would be to find out how something went. But yeah, that is my agenda. I always want to know how things went for her. I want to know what she did, what the grade was and stuff.
For the agenda list, it's more that you don't have a certain place that you want to end up in the conversation. Is you kind of let it flow. You can guide that conversation along, but if it takes a turn somewhere else, it's quite all right. And being in tons of conversations, it almost always ends up back to where it started. And if it was to speak about a test that they had or a quiz, that's that's a wonderful tidbit that they asked. And it's something that has to, I think, be situational.
Yeah. I was going to just add that, I liked what you said, Jake, about guiding and not being there to kind of to necessarily have an end place, because I think as tutors we do encourage that you guide your student to the answer. And sometimes, that can, if you ask too many leading questions, you do have a place where you want them to end up, but you kind of want their brains to work on their own and kind of get to the place on their own. But I do think in some instances, some students need more structure. And I think maybe this tutor is concerned about maybe not going into a session and just not having a structure. And I think that, again, it depends on the student. And some students are going to need more structure, and you're going to tell that you're not really getting anywhere. It's fine to have a conversation, but if they're not really getting anything out of it, then you do need to have a little bit more structure. So I think that, I think both things can work. And you just kind of have to get to know your student and see what works for you.
And I'll say this across the board that I think can help regardless of what your student is like. Time constraint. So like I said, she has 3 minutes to tell me about this Dragon book every week. And we'll set aside like, okay, now 20 minutes for math and stuff. So even if it is like, if they are telling you something, I put a time limit on it. Just because you only have, for most cases, I think just an hour is the average amount. But yeah, that was a really good question. And again, that's just like my personal answer. It could be different for everybody, but that's for my student and I.
All right, so that's great. Thank you so much. I do actually have another question, and then we have to move on because we are speaking of time constraints. We're not out of time, but we have 20 minutes left. So this tutor asks, do you ever have students who don't feel like talking but rather ask the tutor questions? So the students who are, Alana, you were talking about having to draw students out of their shell maybe a little bit, and have you had that experience?
So I absolutely did. She was as shy as it gets, and I am maybe the loudest person on the planet. So what I did with her, we had to make an agreement because she did just want me to do all the talking, and I was like, okay, so you can ask me a question and I'll answer, and then I'm going to ask you something and you have to answer. And these weren't necessarily just personal questions. Like a lot of my questions I asked her is like, what is your favorite subject and why? So we kind of went back and forth, and that worked for us because that made us equals and it made us even. And for her, she likes that. She liked that we were the same, but I didn't know that until I tried it. So that was my first thing is I'm like, okay, well, the first step to lead with is, in my opinion, make us as close to each other as possible. That worked for me, one question at a time. I don't know about everybody else, but I will say that like she was more inclined to talk after I spoke, but they do try to get you to do all the talking. They do. And I think, keep in mind, you are the tutor, so it's like you do have to guide it, as Jake said. So like I said, for her and I, it was 1-for-1. That's how it worked. And it worked. It took some time.
My current student, after I, came in, like my first day with him, I was, asking all the questions. He was answering and he was engaged, but I still don't think he was as comfortable with me. I mean, it was the first couple of sessions, but now, and I've been with him for months, like at least more than half a year, every time I come in, every session, it's a new question or set of questions that he asks me. And it's everything from just school questions to a lot of personal questions. And some people might be offended by them. I'm not, because I took it as a sign as him actually like showing interest and actually feeling comfortable enough for me to ask. So he asked about my sexuality, and I was completely open and honest with him. And then he came back open and honest with me. It wasn't this huge breakthrough where he broke down and cried and confessed his like sexuality. It was not like that at all. That would have been like something out of a Lifetime movie. But it was still, and again, it all goes by tutor too. Like if you're ever in a situation where they're asking you questions, you can be like, that's not appropriate. We're here for this, or let's change the subject to that. But of course, each student is different. Every tutor will have their own stories, but by them asking you the questions, I think it's kind of a good thing too, because they at least are showing that they're trying to get to know you better, or they're trying to like intimidate you and interrogate you. And if you can like fight through it and show that you're not, you're stronger than that, then you just made like a little connection right there.
I love it.
Awesome. Great. Thank you. Good answers.
Yeah, good question.
With this one really quick, it's if the student's asking you tons of questions.
Mhm.
Okay, so I'm gonna make mine really quick. I found that if you kind of have them think about why they're questioning and then answer, they think about why they're asking that question. So it gets their mind going a little bit better. And then whatever you say to them, the process is a little bit better and they better understand a different perspective. So I found that leading with a question in your response to them is really, really helpful. So I just wanted to add that. All right. So anyways, back to questioning, which we were kind of on. The first point here is, and we're going to go left, right, left, right, left, right. Purposeful. Have a reason why you're asking the question to your student, whether it's to get them to think, whether it's to get them to remember, to find out how many answers they got right throughout the week, or how they felt during a certain response that their friends gave them. Ask it with purpose, an intent behind it. To go back to the first screen, purpose is so incredibly important, and it's purpose is something they don't really experience. And so just having purposeful questions come from us, they get to experience purpose. Whether it's not directly theirs, but they get to experience a purpose. So that's, I think, number one, like the first building block is just with purpose, go into every conversation that you have with them. The one to follow that is curious. Actually be curious and wonder what's going on with the student. See where they're at, and just care, as we said earlier, which I'm going to go back to a lot, is just caring. And the student will tell when you're being present, and just they'll know that you're being present, and then just sense this curiosity that you have, and that's a wonderful thing. So the next point is questions that are inspired for them and for you. We don't ask a lot of questions that inspire people. Like how to ask someone, like, how do you change the world isn't a question that we around young high school age kids ask a lot. So I think having them broaden their scope is really important. So when we ask those kind of inspired questions to get their heart kind of pumping and going is incredibly important. So inspired, and just not only questions like that, but the way that you ask that question is in a manner that you are kind of inspiring yourself, kind of putting something in your student where they're like, oh wow, look at the excitement in which they ask questions. Just the question, I kind of want that for myself. The next one kind of falls in line with that, is lively. Just having a tutor who enjoys life a ton is so incredible for that student, because they're usually, the situation that they're in isn't always a good and healthy one. So to have somebody that comes from a different situation and able to bring that life into the conversation is incredibly important, and it's so vital to their growth. A thoughtful one, thoughtful questions, just not only ones that are going to make them think, but also being conscious of where they're at as a person, not overstepping boundaries, making sure that they are comfortable with you, and just being conscious of that. And then the last one's unique. For me, I try and come up with odd questions that are out of left field that people don't really get asked, to get that mind going. Because those things at like that age usually in high school, I know for me, I didn't want to think. I wanted to play video games. I wanted to play sports. I didn't want to think. And it wasn't until I discovered how amazing learning and thinking is did I want to pursue it. So it is an amazing thing, and we kind of have the opportunity to bring a child into that space with us about how awesome learning is. So I think unique questions are really awesome to bring them into that space.
And yeah, just to this is Amanda. I'm just butting in here. I did want to just follow up with tutors because it is important to know that you do, as Jake was just saying about the student having boundaries, also the tutor has boundaries. And Chris's example is great, and I'm sure he has such a great relationship with his student. But not all tutors are going to feel comfortable answering those kinds of questions, and sometimes teens, especially, are going to be pushing to find your boundaries, and they might ask provocative questions on purpose to kind of get you uncomfortable. So you're very welcome to say, please, let's keep it on the schoolwork. And at School on Wheels, we really do encourage you. Of course, we want you to have good relationships and strong relationships with your student, but also just to keep in mind that those relationships should be mainly based on education, based on interests that aren't super personal. Of course, if a student brings something up that's really personal, you're not going to tell them, please I don't want to know that, but that you do want to keep it. It's important because since so many of these students are living in these very difficult circumstances and have a lot of trauma in their pasts, you certainly don't want to intrude on that. And they do have already social workers and all of those kinds of people in their lives to kind of deal with that. But they, if you're focusing on what interests them, what drives them, their school work, the literature they like to read, sports, or whatever their interests are, they're really getting something out of that relationship. They know that you're not just there because you're interested in their traumatic past or whatever, and they might not feel comfortable talking about that. So I think it's just, it's important to remember that, all of the relationships are going to be different, and just to do what you feel comfortable with. And if you do feel comfortable answering a personal question, we just ask that, you try to keep it as professional as you can.
Yeah, I think Amanda has a good point. It's not so much what their life is like so much as what they are like, and then vice versa. So my student and I, we don't talk about dating. Oh, if she ever brought it up, I'm out of there. But we don't talk about that. But we talk about funny things our moms did, and we talk about movies and dragons, as I already mentioned. So it's still personal, but it's a PG. Is how I'll say it. It is PG personal. That's how I say it. But yeah, just before we move on for the questioning, I think all 6 of these loop into one, and kids love answering questions. Kids will love asking you questions to avoid doing work. So just something to keep in mind, when my student doesn't want to do something, all of a sudden she's so interested in my life. So just something to keep in mind is okay, they can ask a few, and again, time limit or a number. I'm okay, let's do some work, and if we have time at the end, we can answer some of these questions. But just always something to keep in mind, because the older they get, I tell you what, guys, they're tricky. But yeah, I think anything else? Should we move on to the next one?
All right. I actually believe the next one is the last, if memory serves me correctly.
Beautiful. Right on time. Look at us go.
So,
great. We still have some questions to answer.
Awesome.
So
Okay.
Go on with your final slide.
Okay.
And then
so this last one is perspective, and this kind of loops back to the beginning, and just connections, I should say. This is a place where you can establish a connection really well with them, just getting to know them. As Amanda just said, it doesn't have to be super personal and where they're coming from and all of that, but just understanding who they are as a person, what they ultimately are striving for in life is incredibly valuable to help them in their journey to succeeding. So just sharing the perspective that you have, and then also understanding their perspective. So this is the last one. And it also just, perspective broadens your scope of seeing the world. It kind of gets you out of your own little bubble. So perspective is just awesome all around the board. The first one is just life in general. What ours is life like within the constraints of what is appropriate. It's always going to be situational, but don't make it something outrageously personal, because it always goes back to that to the tutoring issues. So just kind of keep it with that. Another one, these last two, and hope was mentioned earlier, but then hope and fear. I realize fear drives a lot of our decisions, a ton. It's either like two things that drive it. It's love or fear, and there's so often fear: the fear of rejection, the fear of failure, the fear of being outcast. And so understanding where the kid's coming from can really help you connect with them and why they're not paying attention in this class or that class. They might be afraid they're not good at that, and if they fail, then they're not going to succeed at life, and they're going to end up on the streets or whatever it may be. And so understanding fear and then combating that with hope is an awesome way to do that whole cycle. And so the last one is perseverance. Sometimes I remember with my student, for him to open up, it took probably 5-6 months to really actually open up. And so perseverance is something that I kind of want to wrap up with this, because you're going to need it. Like tutoring a student, they're not going to come to the first session and just say, this is me, like tutor me, like, and this is everything about me. They're not going to be like that. So it takes time for them to feel comfortable with you, for you to feel comfortable with them. And so it's a process. So just persevere through all the difficulties that come up through your times with them, and just be there for them, and they'll be there for you.
I think all of it is great. This is definitely my favorite slide for sure, because it's so much more bigger picture. The two that I'll touch on real quick, fear. Fear of failure is like what paralyzes these kids. Presentations, a test, a homework, anything, like all of it is seems they can get really stressed out about it. My student who's very shy, so stressed out about public speaking, and now years later she like aces her book reports and the class presentation she has to do. So one of the things that I think really helped with the fear was the bigger picture, and the way that I explained to her, we do this project now, and maybe you fumble your words, maybe you don't. In a month from now, it doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter, because you did it, we got that mark that we needed, and now we're on to the next project. And it just gets easier and easier and easier. So I think at this age, in that teenage, everything feels like the world to them. And one of the things that helped her, this is where I told personal stories, to be like, when I was in school, one time I did this project and blah, blah, blah happened, and look at me now. You know what I mean? I'm in jeans, like however you want to say it. But it's like, that is, I found with fear, that's where the personal stories really came in, with what it was like for me in school, and how now later in life, I can't even remember the kid that made fun of me. I don't even know who they are. I can't remember them at all. If I did fumble in a project, which is like a whole story her and I had. And then for perseverance, yeah, guys, as tutors, you got to hang in there. There was 3 months, I kid you not, where she only showed up with the game Candyland and no textbooks. She was not having it. She didn't want to do schoolwork. She didn't want to do anything. So that was like a hard time where it's like we really had to focus. But in that time, I got creative. There was books in the study room that we worked in, and we would do spelling tests. I would just randomly pick words. She had to spell them out loud. I would just write down random math questions on a piece of paper, whatever I had to do. And then I just kept saying to her, like, until you bring a book, we're just going to do whatever I feel like doing. And guess what? That's not going to be as much fun. And maybe if we bring a book, then maybe we could talk about Candyland for 5 minutes at the end of the session. And eventually she brought the books. We got back on track, but sometimes they'll do kind of wild things. You really don't know what they're going to do. But stay the course, persevere. You were there to tutor. And when they realize you're not going to budge from that, they will come back around. It might take a bit, but they'll come. They'll realize, yes, we're here to learn. So. And
I'll just touch real quick on fear and hope to wrap this up. So fear for the students, I mean, a lot of these kids don't know where they're going to end up even tomorrow. Yeah. Like I've had 2 of my students who abruptly have just up and moved, and it's a sad situation. But What you can do as a tutor is give them the hope and the tools that, although you may not be able to provide permanent shelter and food for them on a regular basis, you can give them the tools that you know that they can at least succeed educationally for the rest of their lives, and hope that they'll listen to you and what you have to say, and hope that you can take away something from these students too.
I love it.
I know,
Perfect.
that was
Let's do some
lovely.
questions.
And now questions, bring it on.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I think perseverance is something, yeah, for sure that every tutor needs to have, whether you're tutoring a teenager or a younger student. It's just as equally important just to know that if you put in that effort, you'll see something as develop, but it takes time. Okay, so we do have a time for maybe a question or two from the audience. If anybody else has a question, you can type that right now into the question pane. I also have some questions from registration, but I would like to take it from the live audience if possible. Okay. Well, I'll ask a question from registration just to sum up here because I think it's a good one. It's about I would like to know more about how to mentor students in challenging situations or who are struggling with emotional sensitivities. I know my student is only in 4th grade, but she said a few comments that I wish I had stronger responses for. So an emotionally sensitive student, so dealing with a student who is going through something challenging, and what might you do as a tutor to support that student?
Okay, all right, I'll jump in on this one because this is exactly my student, which is why it took us so long to really establish an open relationship. She's very sensitive, she's very quiet, and she's very emotional but closed off. She doesn't want to talk about it. So I would obviously invite her if she wanted to tell me what was going on. She was always welcome to tell me. She usually didn't. So one of the things that I would tell her, without necessarily getting too personal, was that I also have been emotional about things and I would get really upset. And then I would just say the things that help me. Talking to my sister about it, journaling. Journaling was like the biggest one. It's actually the one she took to, was journaling, because I said that it was like private and I didn't have to tell people, but I still got it off my chest. But the biggest thing that I conveyed to her is that even now at 31, I feel so many emotions all the time and that there's nothing wrong with it. And as life goes on, you just learn to manage it, but to know that everybody is feeling them at different times and you're not alone. And to me, that's the entire theme of School on Wheels. You're not alone. So it might sound cheesy, but that's what I said, and eventually it worked. It really did. If you just keep saying it, it really did work. It really did, because now we talk about everything, so yeah, it helped.
Awesome. That's great. I do have one last question, okay, from our audience. Any recommendations to increase attention span? Quick breaks, that kind of thing. If you're having trouble keeping your students' attention, whether, I don't know if they have, if they, have a special need, or they're just not focused, maybe not able to focus because of some other reason.
I'll jump in real quick on this one in order to keep their attention. So I've only had high school boys, which is like the least attention span group in the world. So what I would do, and of course they never wanted to do their homework. So when they didn't want to do their homework, I would just give them one of two options. It'd be like, okay, so I would create a list of problems that I knew that they could solve, but it required a little critical thinking on their end. And I'd be like, all right, solve these 10 problems, and then we'll go outside and play basketball for 10 minutes. We can get the house, in on it too, but then you have to come back in and we have to at least make it through half of the day's worksheet. And if you don't do that, I don't have anything to do after this. I'm going to go home and watch Netflix so I can sit and stare at you all day until you finish this. And they kind of respected that, like, okay, well, he's not kidding, because I wasn't kidding. I've been there for 3 hours one day trying to get through one sheet. But exactly like you said, like little short breaks, because sitting there for an hour after they just got out of school isn't their ideal evening. Rewarding them with, you can't bring them like candy or treats or anything, but you can reward them in other ways. Focusing on what the subject that they like the most, so that, granted, if they can still get the help they need like somewhere else, but if the kid hates math, try to do their history homework. Just try to make it as interesting as possible, I guess. You hit it right on the head when you said little short breaks, stuff like that. We were all in high school, we were all kids. we know how it is, you know, coming home and having to do more work. But just look, also too, depending on where you're tutoring. So I tutor at a group home, so there are amenities and there are things to focus on. So we have a student in the house who plays guitar. So after 30 minutes one time, I called the student in and was like, hey, play guitar for everybody real quick. And she did. She was really good at it, little high school girl. And she played guitar for everyone, and then I kicked everyone out except my student. I was like, now you have to focus because we just took a break. But just try to incorporate, you know, be a little creative with it, keeping in mind, you know, you were once in their shoes, you know, high school or younger.
That's so
Great.
good. That's
Great.
so great. Yeah. I love it.
Fabulous. Well, I wish we had more time, but we're out of it right now. This was a wonderful workshop. Thank you so much to Jake, Chris, and Alana for joining us tonight. Thank you, tutors, for tuning in tonight, taking some time out of your weeknight to better prepare yourself for your sessions with your students. If you do have any further questions, just email me, or you can type them again into the chat really quick and we can get back to you. Otherwise, thank you so much and have a great night. Until next time.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
All right.